Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's good to be part of this conversation. I'm excited to get into some of these issues with you. I'm going to be spending the time today talking generally about the intersection between technology and politics, and with a specific focus on elections, because I think this is going to be, and it has already become, one of the most urgent issues of our time. And I think it's going to continue being one of the most urgent issues of our time because of the continued reliance of technology in politics, in organizing our politics in our public sphere. It's important to note that there are two, when people speak about tech and democracy, they tend to get to be talking about two separate things that are related, but are actually two slightly different things. So the first thing is obviously the more literal one, which is using tech in the democratic process. And this is using tech in the election process, using tech to enhance public participation in all of the civic tech that we see being built. And then the second layer is democracy in technology, and that is democracy within the use of technology. So we're talking about things like access, we're talking about things like cost, we're talking about things like reach. And sometimes we use these two concepts interchangeably, and then we end up getting questions like, well, if you're talking about all of these benefits of technology, what about the people who don't have access to mobile phones? What about the people who don't have access to routers and things like that? And I would say that it's really important to remember that the issue isn't always necessarily that you have everybody on the internet. The issue is that what are the people who are on the internet, who are using technology? What are they using it for? And how is it impacting the political processes in their society? So I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes sort of teasing out those ideas and how, with that sort of framework in mind, that I'm going to be focusing specifically about the intersection between technology and politics, that is the use of tech in democracy, the use of tech in elections specifically. And I'm going to be speaking about the experience of Kenya, and not just because Kenya is where I am, where I sit, but because Kenya really has been an outlier, taking tremendous leaps and bounds in the use of technology in politics. And 2017, for example, we had the second fully digital election in Africa. The first was held in maybe a couple of months before. It was by many measures the most expensive election in the world, with a per capita spend of about $28. The average spend in other elections is about $1 in India, is about $3 in the United States. So $28 per capita in a developing countries is actually a significant spend. And by many metrics, the election in 2017 was one of the most expensive civic processes in the country's history. And you know, it's really important when I start these talks, I really want people to understand that what happens technology and politics in Kenya is not accidental. It's a deliberate part of the political processes that emerged from the 2007 election and its outcomes, which, you know, many of you might know ended up being one of the most violent elections in the region, certainly, but definitely in Kenya. About 1,500 people were killed in the aftermath, and over 100,000 people lost their homes. And as one of the peace and reconciliation processes that came from that election was a deliberate initiative to incorporate technology into politics, into elections, in order to prevent the recurrence of political electoral violence. And the promise was basically that if we use technology, and it will enhance transparency, it will enhance accountability, it will make elections more reliable and trustworthy, and this will reduce the scope for violence. And so my research in my book basically looks at the 10-year arc between the 2007 election and the 2017 election to explore whether those promises that technology makes or that were, I guess, conferred upon technology, to explore whether those promises were delivered. And the short answer is really yes, and yes, because I'm going to just run through some of these very quickly. Yes, because there were some good outcomes that came from that process. For one thing, the emergence of social media, and I heard the previous speaker talking about the negatives of social networking. I think it's really important not to lose out on the positives as well. And in countries whereby the traditional media has retreated, where there are no national newspapers, there are not that many national broadcasters, social media has become one of the places whereby citizens can convene and where people can have conversations that are holding governments accountable, that are allowing people to build community and political participation within their societies. And so what we saw, for example, in Kenya was that there was a mobilization for election observation, for almost informal, independent election observation. When people started to question the results, the first thing that they did was they went on the social networking sites to say, the result that's being reported in the official election result is different from the result that was posted at my polling station, and starting to show that what was happening with the results transmission system was not an accurate reflection of what had happened in the individual polling stations. This is a pattern that has been repeated in many other African countries. In Senegal, there was an official website that represented this civil society coalition that was basically independently tabulating the results of the election and posting them on Twitter. And so running a constant Twitter thread during the election, not this last election, but the previous one, running a constant Twitter updates of the results that were happening in the different parts of the country, and being able, especially for the diaspora, to keep them appraised of what was happening with regards to the election. This ties to my second point about the good things that happen, which is about public accountability, which is about really being able to hold institutions accountable to the standards that they set for themselves. And I don't think that there's any institution in Kenya that has felt the wrath or the fury, I guess, of the voting public as much as the Independent Election and Boundaries Commission. This is the state agency that runs electoral processes in the country. And people have been using social networking sites to, as I said, raise questions about disparities in the polling numbers, to raise questions about, why has this polling station not been opened? Why has this polling station not received the materials? All of these key questions that are raising the quality of election participation across the country. And again, these are patterns that are repeating all across the world. We're seeing even in the United States, we're seeing people going on social networking sites to raise awareness about, the questions and the things that are happening within their political, symbolic, if you will, of this growing desire to remain connected to the political process and to remain engaged in the political process. And that's not to say that there isn't a negative side to this, but it's just to say that it really depends on the country in question, and it depends on the society in question. And finally, we have the broader contextual shifts that come from that, which is the shifting narratives and the shifting conversations that the digital has made possible around election, around political processes. Allowing people to, engage directly, especially with institutions, is a thing that in a lot of autocratic repressive societies just doesn't happen very often. It's not very easy to, if the bureaucracy is abstracted from your day-to-day life, it's not very easy to hold them accountable and to be able to say, well, my role as a citizen is to raise these issues and to bring it to the table. I think that's the thing that people who live in somewhat free societies maybe take for granted, but in a lot of the world, that's just not how things work. And so being able to do that, being able to gather critical mass of people, shifts the political horizon, shifts the ideas of what people think is possible, is doable, is attainable within the political context. And in Kenya, what we really saw, people were discussing accountability, were discussing electoral accountability across class lines, across geographical lines, across all of these invisible lines that divide the society, being able to say, actually, what we want is a more transparent political process. So that's the good, but it would be completely disingenuous to stay with the good. There is also bad, and there is also what I call the ugly. And with regards to the bad, when using tech in democracy, the most obvious issue is tech doesn't actually make election processes more transparent. What we've seen is it actually makes them more opaque. It makes it such that the people who are building the technology around your election, the people who have proprietary key for your election process, are able to, are able to basically do whatever they want. And if you don't have a corresponding person on the state side, on the society side, who understands the processes, it's very easy to be, hoodwinked. I'll give you a great example. What happened in Kenya was that the software that run Kenya's election was actually built in France. It's a French company that built and managed the election process. And there was a presidential petition that demanded a recount and basically an audit of the election results. And during the court proceedings, there was the moment when the Chief Justice the Chief Justice in Kenya asked lawyers for the Independent Election Boundaries Commission to make the servers accessible to lawyers for the opposition so that the audit could be conducted. And the lawyer for the Election Commission said, and I quote, "Your Honor, we can't open the servers because the servers are in France and the people in France are asleep." Now, that might seem like a very simple sentence, but what it actually is an expropriation of a very key political process to another country whereby the citizens of the first country do not have any kind, where Kenyans are not taxpayers in France. They have no legislative oversight over French a private company. They have no way of keeping the company that's building this server accountable beyond the relationship that exists between the state and the contracted party. And this is going to become increasingly common as more and more countries move towards tech-based elections. You're going to have procurement processes, bidding processes, where especially poor countries will be trying to bring in experts, if you will, from other parts of the world to build these platforms without there being this exchange of IP, this exchange of what is actually the nuts and bolts of the software that's being developed. And so it's really important. I think India has tried to build in an open access, an open source standard with its election, with its civic tech, let's say more broadly, that technology that's used in public sphere in India must be open source. I think that's a very important. We should really think about that. Even while read in terms of what will people be able to do, what will people who have bad intentions be able to do with that tech if they have access to the IP. To that is the question of ballooning expenses. As I mentioned before, the 2017 election in Kenya was per capita the most expensive election in the world. And developing countries are increasingly spending more and more on their elections. And if you think elections happening every 5 years, every 4 years, eating up huge swaths of the national budget, then you have to wonder what isn't getting done by the money that's being spent on these elections. What are we not doing? Right now, Kenya is in the middle. Kenya has yet to recover from the costs of the 2017 election, which ended up resulting in a second election and ended up resulting in a second round of campaigns. It really the national and now should elections, even though they are important, even though they are crucial to the democratic process, what happens in elections? And then there's this is really the stuff that sort of keeps me at night as an analyst, which is forms of violence. Violence in the broad sense of the word, meaning physical violence, but also structural violence, new forms of exclusion, new forms of abuse, especially targeting women, but also minorities. And the digital does make possible, as the previous speaker spoke about, and as I would underscore, that does make possible forms of discourse that undermine the very principles of democracy. It does make possible those kinds of conversations. It makes it, just as it makes it easier for good people to find each other, it also makes it easier for bad people to find each other. And the problem that we have is that the philosophy, the ethos that has guided tech has been treats both conversations as if they're qualitatively equal. But a person who is convening people to, I don't know, knit sweaters for abandoned babies, that conversation does not have the same moral question mark as people who are gathering to, plan a mass murder, which has happened and does happen routinely in social networking sites. So, the idea that all speech is neutral and all speech should be enabled has really run into a lot of moral question marks in the last few years. And I'm not here to propose that there is an easy answer. I'm here to propose that it's something that requires more attention and more efforts, more philosophers, more humanities people thinking about these issues. And finally, especially from a person who is sitting in the global south, there is a question of digital colonialism. Most of the companies that are building elections tech, that are building civic tech, are companies that are coming from outside Africa, primarily in Europe, increasingly in China, and in the United States. What that does, when read against all of the previous points that I've made about distracting spending and shifting priorities, shifting national priorities, is that digital then becomes a frontier, a new frontier for the expropriation of large amounts of national capital from poor countries to wealthier countries under the guise of delivering more efficient political processes. And I use the word colonialism deliberately because, the first wave of colonization, the violence of colonization that began, the Berlin Conference in 1885, really did begin with private corporations, really did begin with the British East Africa Company and the German East Africa Company, and all of these corporations being the vanguard of a process that culminated in the political colonization of poor countries for the economic privilege of wealthy countries. And this is what we have to be wary of what's happening with this digital process. When a poor country spends 2%, 3%, 5% of its national budget on a single company to build, civic tech, to build an election platform, to build a procurement platform, to build whatever tech platform it is. Hospitals are not getting built. But more importantly, what does it make possible with regards to the relationship between that poor country and the parent company, or the parent country, of the company that is building that technology? Include there and really say that, look, I'm not a tech optimist and I'm not a tech pessimist. I'd like to think that I'm a tech realist. And so I don't think that it's wise to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think we should what we really should be aiming for is a process whereby we can incubate the good, we can protect the good, we can push back against the bad, and we can completely destroy and overcome the ugly. And I'll stop there. Thank you.